Excuse me, but what are you doing with all those ballots?
I'm voting for my dog, Lily. She's running for cat catcher.
Where did you get all those ballots?
In the trash at the nursing home.
In the trash at the nursing home? You're only supposed to vote once.
I am only voting once. I'm just doing it 38 times.
You only get one vote.
You know who I am?
No, I don't know who you are.
Good!
One vote!
No!
Can only vote once!
No!
You can't catch me, I'm the gingerbread man!
If I was 78, I would have caught you, you know!
Welcome to another episode of Travels with Charlie, Vermont Politics in Real Life. We're at Vermont State House in Montpelier today, and as you can see, they've gone to great lengths to make sure that we practice social distancing in our filming of this video today. We're going to be discussing voting by mail. And my guests today are former Representative from Essex, Paul Dane, and Vermont Secretary of State, Jim Condos. Thank you both for joining me today. Let me ask both of you, there seems to be a partisan issue here about voting by mail. That seems to be, it's taking that type of lead. Do you both agree that this is a partisan issue? And if so, why? Jim, you want to go first?
Sure. I don't believe it's a partisan issue at all. In fact, if you look at across the country, the state of Utah is a universal vote by mail state, and no one would say that they were blue in any way. They have a Republican House, a Republican Senate, and a Republican governor. And here in Vermont, the bill passed with strong tripartisan support. And I think that this really isn't a partisan issue.
Paul, do you think it's a partisan issue?
I think in some of those places where you see that sort of nonpartisan acceptance of mail-in voting, there's a balance. We want to expand access, but we also want to maintain integrity. That's where we can make it a bipartisan issue.
So in this era of COVID-19, we're all concerned about our health, we're concerned about our safety and so forth. Jim, let me ask you, has there been a huge outcry from the public about having to go to the polls to vote for the upcoming primary and then for the national election in November?
So yeah, there has been, and frankly, what we've seen is we've seen town clerks who are worried about having poll workers, because if you think about it, most of our poll workers are in the high vulnerability risk cohort. If you just look at the numbers as of yesterday, same time 2 years ago for the general election, for the primary, we had about 1,500 absentee requests. So far this year, same time period, we've got over 10,000.
The conclusion of the 2005 bipartisan report chaired by former President Jimmy Carter and former Secretary of State James Baker concluded that absentee ballots remain the largest source of potential voter fraud. Former President Jimmy Carter recently changed his stance on that, although I'm not sure if that was due to a study or not. But let me ask you and ask both of you, what's changed since 2005 and today? Why should we trust voting by mail more today than we did in 2005?
The first thing I would say is that it wasn't until 2006 that states were required to have a voter checklist statewide. And then in 2015, we actually put a state-of-the-art system in place that allows clerks to be able to check for duplications, to update people's information. What I say often is that the voter registration database today is much more accurate than it was yesterday or the day before or the year before because of this new system.
I think a lot of what Jim said has some merit. We've been able to use technology to refine the voter rolls, but we're not perfect by any means. I know in my own hometown, I was on the Board of Civil Authority, and we had folks who were in there that I knew. With the first year I got on, they hadn't lived in town in 8 years. So I think there's certainly still some holes in that. Nothing's going to be perfect. The best way we have to sort of maintain the validity of who's still around is voting in person. I think that's one of the reasons there are a lot of people that still want that voting in person option.
In that same study, it also stated that citizens who vote at home, in nursing homes or the workplace or a church, are more susceptible to pressure, overt and subtle, or to intimidation. Vote buying schemes are far more difficult to detect when citizens vote by mail. So how is that being addressed, or has it been addressed? Jim?
So first thing I would say is we've been using vote by mail since the Civil War. Our military and overseas personnel have been using vote by mail ever since then. And you could actually make a case that if that's the case, then having a staff sergeant standing over a corporal while he fills out his ballot telling him how to vote could occur. We don't believe that happens, and frankly, it's against the law to influence someone else's ballot. The proof is in the pudding. It's very, very low voter fraud that occurs. It's like 0.00004% or something. It's a ridiculously low number. Obviously, we should strive so that there is no voter fraud. That is something that we all should pay attention to.
Are you secure that you know, ballots that are in nursing homes and multifamily homes, people aren't going to be coerced to vote in a way that they don't want to vote, or maybe they're not even aware of how to vote and somebody's doing it for them?
We kind of weigh the pros and the cons of what's available, and in those cases, mail-in is the only option in those cases. I think that even in folks in nursing homes who aren't able to physically get out to the poll, or in Essex Junction, I had a lot of folks who worked 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. at IBM, which is now Global Foundry. So they even if they wanted to, they were able-bodied, they couldn't get there, they had to work. So we have to make that accessible to folks who know that they're going to need it or want to plan ahead. But I think going to the step of sending everyone a ballot when they didn't ask for it creates a lot of potential problems. Folks, especially this year, who haven't had that process happen before, I've had lots of folks throw away mail that they think is junk, because some of these junk mailers get pretty sophisticated. They make things look official. So when we try to send out official documents, people throw them in the trash. So I think the August primary is a good example of how we've maintained that balance between expanding access and maintaining integrity, because only the people who ask for the ballot are going to get them.
Paul, what sort of plan would you like to see implemented? Or maybe we don't need anything at all. You know, people are shopping in supermarkets now, retail stores, they're eating out, and we've even got protests in large numbers.
Yeah. Well, I think there's still going to be a need, and a greater need than we've had before, for folks who want to do absentee ballot. But Jim has raised a couple good issues. There are concerns about how many poll workers we're going to have. And that's something I think that we've got to put effort in, because as much as there are some people who want to vote by mail, there are still people who want to take their ballot and watch it go into that box and know that it's safe, secure, 100%, it got to where it needs to go.
So let me ask you this, because that brings up a point. I get a ballot in the mail, but I decide I want to go to the voting booth and vote. What happens to that ballot?
You can bring it with you.
Should you bring it with you? Should you be required to bring it with you? I
mean,
mean,
you don't have to.
But what happens to it? What if somebody fills it out?
There is a tracking process. So when the clerk receives a request, or when a ballot goes out, the date that it goes out is logged into the system. When the ballot comes back, the clerk will again log that the ballot has come back. And that happens for all absentee ballots currently, and has for several years, for many years. And going forward, what will happen is the same thing. So if Charlie Papillo shows up at the polling location without his ballot and says, I left my ballot at home, or I lost it, and I want to vote, they will look you up in their system and see that, yes, you have not returned a ballot and give you a ballot at that point.
So there is security on that.
So there is security on that. You will also be able to, you can take your ballot when you receive it at home, and fill it out on your kitchen table, and walk it to your town clerk's office during the 45-day early vote period.
And I know this question's come up a number of times. Why not just expand the current absentee voting plan?
Well, actually, we are doing that for the primary, and that is by design. First of all, if we wanted to do vote by mail totally the way we want to do it for the general election, we would have had to start back in February.
We hear this all the time, and you know, it's anecdotal. I don't have any facts or figures to back it up, but you hear about people that they moved, their name is still on a voter checklist.
That was me. I lived in Essex when I ran for the state senate in 2018. I was on the ballot, said Paul Dame from Essex, and from the time that the primary started, before the general election, I moved within Chittenden County to another town. So I stood in front of the polling place in Essex. I've been voting there for 6 or 8 years. If I had gone in and said, I'm here to vote, my name was on the list. Would have been no problem. Everyone would have thought that was normal. What I actually did is I didn't do that because I didn't live in that town. I went to St. George, where I had moved, and I did my same-day registration. I was kind of surprised at what little degree there was to make sure that there was no way for that town clerk in St. George to know that I hadn't voted already that same day in Essex. So you add that into this idea that we're sending a bunch of ballots out. If somebody had moved, my name would have been on the old address. They could have sent that in. I could have same-day registered somewhere else, and no one would have been able to look for those kinds of overlaps or those discrepancies.
So Jim, how do we safeguard the voter checklist? How do we make sure that those voter checklists are accurate?
You go to sign up for same-day voter registration. When they put your information in, the system is actually looking to see if you are registered, and will flag it and send it back to them and say, he is registered in Essex town, and then the clerk, by just a single click, can send a note to the St. George clerk and say, he's now registered here. Yeah. So there is a way to do that. We also look at... Does
that system also determine whether or not a vote has been cast early or absentee? Okay.
Same thing.
Even for same day?
Even for same day, they can do that if they connect to the internet.
Gotcha.
At the polling location. You know, there was the issue of dead people on the voter checklist, because there was a case down, I forget if it was North Carolina or South Carolina, where an attorney general had this big press conference, said they found 900 people roughly that had voted while they were dead. Well, it turned out the little story that came out later, several months later, was that like 890 of the 900 had voted early and then passed away. That vote still counts as long as it's gone to the clerk. Once it's in the clerk's hands, it's a vote.
You know, one of the issues here, and maybe for old timers like us, Jim, it's loss of a tradition. But you know, going forward, I see so many different changes now. How do you convince somebody that has been doing it? You know, somebody's in their 60s, somebody's in their 70s. How do you convince them that, oh, this is the right way to do it, it's secure? Because that's really where some of the obstinance is. It's like, you know, guys like me go, nah, you know, I want to go to the voting booth, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think at the end of the day, we always want to make sure that people can exercise their right to vote in the way that they feel comfortable, that nobody feels threatened about how they're being forced. We don't want to force people who want to vote in person. We're not going to force them to vote by mail. There are some people who want to vote by mail. We don't want to force them to vote in person. But as we expand access, we just want to maintain integrity and make sure that whatever we're doing, we're not expanding access to the point that we're compromising integrity. I think what we've done for the August primary is good, and I would kind of, you know, my sort of question is, if it's good enough for the August primary, why aren't we using that same model for the general election? Because it kind of makes the case, if we're doing two different things, one of them is deficient, you know, and I'm just wondering which one, you know, if that's the case, you know, then why are we doing things the way that we are for the August primary? It seems like that's got a good mix of expanding access and integrity that we're losing some in the general election.
What you're really looking at is one very simple change to the general election, and that is that we will mail a ballot directly to every active registered voter. After that, everything else is the same. As far as the difference between the primary and the general election, the big difference is that we couldn't be ready for vote by mail to put all the things in place that we need to put in from an integrity standpoint.
So let's go beyond the next election and go out 15, 20 years from now, Jim. It's been talked about before, voting via computer. We don't have to, that would certainly cut down on mail. Just go to your computer and vote. We won't be here to worry about that.
I might have to worry about that.
Paul will worry about
I think that's one of the things I've always appreciated whenever I've heard Jim get asked this question. I've always heard him say, we want a paper copy, because things happen, computers fail, and if we have a paper copy, we can always go back by hand and check everything out.
You agree, Jim? You need that paper backup.
I do agree with that, and just to take it a little bit further, because we get asked a lot about this, about using a mobile phone, iPhone to vote and stuff, and Paul's in IT, that's his background, and I guess what I would say is we're not ready for it yet. The security around whether it be a computer or an iPhone is just not there yet. And most of the experts will tell you that. I was talking to one vendor who was trying to convince me that oh, well, our system works really good. We've got 12 layers of security. And I said, well, what happens if you get through 12? Well, we'll have to add a couple more. I mean, that's the point.
This is the part of the program that give a magic wand. It's a virtual magic wand, whether we're doing it via Zoom or actually outside today, a virtual magic wand, and let them, our guests, wish for whatever they'd like. Paul Dane, wave the wand, whatever you'd like, Paul.
Yeah. Wow. With much power comes great responsibility. My magic wand is going to be kind of unimpressive. I think that we have a really good solution for the August primary. And that we would just continue that for the general election. I don't think there's anything defective about what we're doing in August. People that want to vote, we're reminding them that they can do it by absentee. We're making that process easier, but still, only the people who ask for the ballots are going to get them. I think that's a really good compromise. That would be my magic wand.
Jim, you've got the wand.
My dream would be that we had 100% voting, obviously, it's a goal, but we'll never get there, but it's a goal. And we expect that we might see a higher percentage this year because of COVID, actually. I mean, we think that by doing the things that we're putting in place, more people will be able to cast a ballot. And we shouldn't be afraid of democracy, and that really is what this is about.
Thanks, guys. I want to thank my guest today for being with me on Travels with Charlie. Thanks to Secretary of State Jim Condos and former Representative Paul Dane. I want to remind you that you can watch more episodes of Travels with Charlie on Facebook and YouTube, and I'll catch you in my travels.
I want to hear what unravels. I'll see you in my travels, and I'll be hanging round, covering lots of ground. If you'd be so kind to share what's on your mind, it's time well spent.